Hi, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to continue working on the axe handle stool by cutting the mortises. Now we've already dished this out last time and I just took a little bit of time to sand this out so everything is roughly smooth, but it's not perfect yet, but that's okay. We're going to start today by removing the bottom plate that we've been using to keep everything symmetrical. Now that the bottom has been removed, we need to connect lines between all of the screw holes. To make the mortises, we'll be using a really simple jig just made out of some 1/2-inch plywood and a couple of scrap pieces of wood. I'll be using my router with a 5/8 collar and a 1/2-inch mortising bit. To make this, because I wanted that axe eye so that it would be wider at one side and narrow at the other end, I cut a 5/8 hole here, and then to make it a 1/4 inch wider at this end, I just jumped up to a 7/8 hole here, all along my center line, and then just remove the material in between, and that left me with this nice shape that I can use. Now, to get the correct splay for the legs, I've raised this end of the jig up about 1.5 inches, and it's about 12 inches long, so that just seems to be about the right distance. And I can just get my center lines lined up. And I want to make sure I really clamp this in place. I don't want this jig moving at all. Now that everything is clamped in place, we can cut the mortise. And I want to do this slowly. I don't want to plunge all the way down through the material and cut it because I'm afraid I'll get a lot of tear out on the bottom side. So we'll just do a little bit at a time. And there we have it, a nice clean mortise cut to the correct angle to receive our leg. The next step is to round over the top and bottom of the seat. After rounding over the seat at the router table, I just took some 120 grit, went around the edge of the seat and took all the tool marks off, and now I'm ready to start working on the legs and to fit them to the mortise. The first thing I want to do is just take this over to the bandsaw and cut this off at about 2 inches, give myself a good 2 inches that I can work with. I really don't want to have to spend the time and energy to shape this whole end here, especially since it's not going anywhere. You know, one of the other things, when I was actually making the mortises, I took a scrap piece of wood and just cut an extra mortise in it. This will give me an opportunity. First of all, it's a lot easier just to hold this up and try to fit the mortise this way than to have to use the seat. The other thing is that if you're trying to fit it to the seat itself, it might get tight, you might try to force it, and unfortunately you run the risk of splitting the seat apart. So it's much easier just to ruin a piece of scrap wood than it would the actual mortise. Before I begin actually shaping the end of the leg, there's one more thing I want to do, and that's just take this piece of scrap that's cut off from a former leg. I'm going to put that on the end of my axe handle here, and I'm going to draw around that so that I can kind of get a rough idea of where I need to trim down to. This just makes it a lot easier. One of the things that you can do if you decide to build this, it would just be get a piece of scrap wood and actually practice the whole taking it down with a belt sander like I'm going to do, and get that to fit your mortise if you can. that way you'll have a piece that you can use as a pattern for the end. You also get a rough idea of what it's like to perform this operation. And once you've done it a few times, it actually gets pretty easy and you can go through these legs fairly quickly. To actually take the handle down to the correct size, I just have my old belt sander turned upside down and clamped in the vise, and I'll just kind of work it from side to side. And remember that I want to make sure I keep these sides as flat as I can because the sides of my mortise are flat. I don't want to rock it a lot here. And then I want to really work, especially the front and the back edge. You need to be careful that you keep those to the correct shape so that they will meet the back and the front of the mortise correctly. Now, one of the things, to make sure that I'm not taking more off on one side or the other, you'll see me look at the side of the axe handle, especially initially, to make sure that I'm taking off the same amount at the top as I am at the bottom. Here you can see it's just a little bit wider at the bottom, which probably means that I'm taking a little bit more off at that end, and I just need to raise the back of the axe handle up a little bit so that I'm taking all the material off evenly. The other thing I'm going to check for is I'm going to look at this end here and see that this flat line across the front is closely matching my line that I just marked on there. And the other thing to be aware of is, remember we've taken this shoulder down to the close to the correct depth, so I'm also watching that as well. So these all things just kind of help you get this as accurate as you can. Now I've got this fairly close, and I want to see where I'm rubbing. So what I'm going to do is just put some sidewalk chalk on either side of this, and that'll show me the high points that I'm rubbing, and I can just use that as a guide to remove the rest of the material. So I got a little bit of rubbing right up here at the front and some right here in the back. So go ahead and take that down a little bit more. After about 20 minutes of sanding and just kind of doing some fitting, I got it so that it fits relatively snug up against there. And we can go ahead, I'll do a little bit of fine tuning to get it to seat just right, but it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and do the rest of them. As I do my final fit, and I'm actually going to do this on the seat, if I put this in here, I got a nice snug fit, but it doesn't quite seat all the way. Now I don't want to go all the way just yet, because we introduced a radius to this edge when we use the file to shape it. We're going to put that radius around the mortise here, and we'll just do that with a, I believe it's a 3/8 inch radius round over bit with a pilot bearing. Now we can bring this in, and you can see we get a much perfect fit right there. Now that all the legs have been fitted, I'm going to draw a line around the top of each leg as it comes through. And then I'll trim these legs just about a 1/4 inch above this line. That gives me plenty of room to bring that through. And we'll also have to put a kerf through the top of these legs to receive the wedge. Now that the handle's been trimmed, I need to cut the kerf to receive the wedge. And I'm just going to do that with a handsaw. To make the wedges to go into the handles, I have a piece of scrap Pacific U, and I set up my tennoning jig in my table saw. I've tilted my blade to 4 degrees, and I'll just make a series of cuts, adjusting as I go to get the correct wedge that I'm looking for. The last thing I want to do before I assemble the stool is to sand the bottom with 220 grit sandpaper. Now I've already raised the grain with a little bit of water, and I'll just go over this and get it as smooth as I can. The reason for that is that once it's assembled with the legs, it's really difficult to get in and around all the nooks and crannies with the sander. We're ready to go ahead and start the assembly. And the first thing I did is I just took some scrap wood and I made this kind of X frame to set things on. It'll make things easier when I'm trying to insert the legs. I can put it top down on here, put the seat top down, and then I can drive the legs down through. When I'm done, I'll flip everything over, and then I can use this base as a system for clamping, and I'll show you how that's going to work in a second here. To do the assembly, I'm going to be using some 5-minute epoxy here, so I kind of have to work fast. We'll mix up a bunch and then put a couple legs on here. You'll notice that I put some blue tape around the end of the leg, and that's just to keep with any drips that I might get, although I am using a gel epoxy, so it shouldn't be that bad. The second leg over here. And our last leg. So now, what I do is turn this over there, and I can flip it over here, and hopefully keep it all the legs inside. I'm going to move around a little bit. This way I can make sure everything is flat and on the level, on the same level. Before I put the clamps on, I'm going to go ahead and drive the wedges in. Just going to put a little bit of epoxy on both sides of the wedge. Don't need to do that much. You're going to see that quite a bit of this wedge is going to stick out, and that's fine. Make sure I got throw a couple clamps up here real quick. Also making sure the legs are lining up flat on my board down here. There we go. Looks like we got a pretty good assembly here. I got stuff dripping down the bottom. That's why I put the tape on there, so hopefully cleanup will be fairly easy. We'll let this set overnight, let the epoxy cure really well, and then we'll go ahead and cut the tops off. Well, that's about all we have time for today. Next time we'll work on clearing off the top, putting in the footrest, and then applying some finish. As usual, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please feel free to email me at andrew@thelevelplumbing square. And until next time, enjoy your day.